Thank you. And as my mama would say,
Alan Jackson's story is not just about music. It is about faith, struggle, love, and staying true to yourself in a world that constantly tries to change you. From the very beginning, his life carried the quiet strength of someone who never expected fame, but earned it through honesty and persistence. He often reflects on how blessed he has been, a sentiment rooted deeply in his upbringing. Love, as he understands it, is powerful but fragile, something that brings immense joy yet leaves a deep ache when lost. That emotional truth is at the heart of everything he has ever sung, and it reflects the era of country music he came from, a time when songs meant something real to the people who listened. There was a period when country music was more than just entertainment. It was a reflection of everyday life. Artists like George Jones could break hearts with a single note, delivering pain so raw it felt personal. Merle Haggard sang about working-class struggles because he lived them, and his authenticity made every lyric believable. Johnny Cash and Waylon Jennings proved that stepping outside the rules, being outlaws, allowed them to tell deeper, more honest truths than those who played it safe. That generation of musicians created songs that didn't rely on flashy production or commercial trends. Instead, they relied on emotion, storytelling, and truth. For millions of fans, those voices became the soundtrack to their lives. They told stories of love, heartbreak, faith, and survival in a way that felt genuine. The music didn't need heavy beats or pop influences to resonate. It connected because it was real. As time passed, artists like Alan Jackson and George Strait carried that tradition forward. To many fans, they represented the last bridge between the golden age of country music and a rapidly changing industry. They were proof that authentic country music had not completely disappeared. However, as the years went on, many fans began to feel disconnected from what country music had become. The sound on the radio started to change, blending with pop and other genres in a way that stripped away the identity that once defined it. Traditional instruments faded into the background, replaced by production choices that prioritized commercial success over storytelling. For long-time listeners, it felt like the soul of the genre was being lost. Alan Jackson recognized this shift early on, and in 2000, he and George Strait recorded Murder on Music Row, a song that directly criticized the industry for abandoning its roots. It was more than just a song. It was a warning about what would happen if authenticity was sacrificed for profit. As time proved, that warning was not unfounded. The changes continued, and the gap between traditional country music and modern mainstream releases grew wider. Yet through it all, Alan Jackson remained committed to the sound and message he believed in. Now, at 67, as he announces his farewell tour, titled Last Call, One More for the Road, there is a sense of finality that resonates deeply with his fans. The name itself carries emotional weight, suggesting not just the end of a tour, but the closing chapter of an era. His journey began in a small house in Noonan, Georgia, built by his grandfather and filled with the noise and life of a large family. Growing up as the only boy among 4 sisters, Alan experienced a childhood shaped by simplicity, hard work, and strong values. His father worked as a mechanic, earning a living with his hands, and teaching his son the dignity of honest labor. Those early lessons stayed with Alan throughout his life, grounding him even as he rose to fame. The family's life revolved around their church, where Alan first discovered his ability to sing. Standing among his family in the pews, he began to notice that people turned to listen when he sang, not out of curiosity, but because something in his voice moved them. That realization planted a seed, though at the time a career in music seemed far beyond his reach. As a teenager, he bought a used guitar and taught himself to play, spending hours learning songs by ear and developing the skills that would later define his career. His path to success was anything but easy. After marrying his high school sweetheart, Denise, the two built a life together filled with uncertainty but also determination. Denise played a pivotal role in his journey, working as a flight attendant while Alan pursued his dream. It was her courage and belief in him that led to a life-changing moment when she approached country star Glenn Campbell at an airport and asked for advice. That brief encounter resulted in a business card and an opportunity, prompting the couple to move to Nashville with little more than hope. The early years in Nashville were filled with rejection and struggle. Alan worked in a mailroom while trying to get his music noticed, facing countless setbacks. Yet he continued writing and performing, driven by a belief that he could succeed. Eventually, he was signed to a record label, and his debut album marked the beginning of a career that would go on to define modern country music. Throughout the 1990s, Alan Jackson achieved remarkable success, releasing hit songs that connected deeply with audiences. His music stood out not just because of its quality, but because of its honesty. He sang about real experiences, family, work, love, and loss, in a way that felt relatable and sincere. While others adapted to changing trends, he remained steadfast in his identity, refusing to compromise his sound. Despite his success, his personal life was not without challenges. The demands of touring and fame placed a strain on his marriage, leading to a period of separation after he was unfaithful. It was a painful chapter that tested both him and Denise deeply. However, through faith and forgiveness, they were able to rebuild their relationship. Denise's strength and commitment played a crucial role in their reconciliation, turning their story into one of redemption and resilience. Tragedy also touched their family when their daughter lost her husband in a sudden accident. For Alan, it was a reminder that no amount of success can shield a person from life's hardships. As a father, he faced the helplessness of watching his child endure unimaginable pain, reinforcing the themes of love and loss that have always been present in his music. One of the most defining moments of his career came in response to the events of September 11, 2001. Like millions of others, he struggled to process the tragedy, but as a songwriter, he found a way to express those emotions through music. The song he wrote captured the confusion, grief, and humanity of that moment, resonating with listeners across the country. It became an anthem, demonstrating the power of simple, honest storytelling. Beyond music, Alan Jackson has also shown a commitment to giving back, whether through charitable contributions or personal involvement in community efforts. He has consistently used his platform to help others. His actions reflect the values he was raised with, emphasizing humility and compassion. As the country music industry continued to evolve, Alan found himself increasingly at odds with its direction. The rise of commercially driven trends left little room for the traditional style he represented. While he could have adapted, he chose not to, prioritizing authenticity over popularity. This decision may have limited his presence on modern radio, but it strengthened his bond with fans who valued his integrity. Adding to the challenges he faces is a genetic condition that affects his nervous system, gradually impacting his physical abilities. It is a reality he has long been aware of, having seen its effects on his father. Despite this, he has continued to perform and create music, demonstrating resilience in the face of adversity. Through it all, Denise has remained by his side, a constant source of support and strength. Their relationship, tested by time and hardship, stands as a testament to the power of love and commitment. Together, they have navigated the highs and lows of life, emerging stronger with each challenge. Alan Jackson's legacy is not just measured in awards or record sales, but in the impact he has had on people's lives. His music has provided comfort, inspiration, and a sense of connection for millions. As he prepares to step away from touring, there is a sense of finality that resonates deeply with his fans. Another layer added to the deep imprint he will leave behind in the world of country music. As Alan Jackson steps closer to the final curtain, there is a quiet realization settling over country music fans. This isn't just the end of a tour, it's the fading echo of a voice that helped define what country music truly meant. For decades, Alan Jackson wasn't just making songs, he was preserving a feeling rooted in front porches, small-town roads, Sunday mornings, and long nights filled with reflection. And now, as that chapter begins to close, fans aren't just looking back at his hits, they're holding on to the emotions those songs carried. The farewell tour, Last Call, One More for the Road, feels symbolic in every sense. It's not loud or flashy. It doesn't try to compete with modern spectacle. Instead, it mirrors the man himself, simple, honest, and deeply meaningful. Each performance feels less like a concert and more like a goodbye between old friends. And that's what makes this moment so powerful. Because artists like George Jones, Merle Haggard, Johnny Cash, and Waylon Jennings didn't just influence Alan Jackson, they were part of a lineage, a passing of truth from one voice to another. And with Jackson stepping away, that chain feels like it's reaching its final link. Even alongside legends like George Strait, who also carried the torch of traditional country, Jackson stood out because of how deeply personal his music felt. He didn't just sing stories, he lived them, and you could hear that in every note. But what makes his story even more compelling now is not just the music, it's the man behind it, facing time, change, and physical challenges with the same quiet strength that defined his entire life. His battle with Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease has added a layer of vulnerability to his final years on stage. Fans watching him perform now don't just see a legend, they see courage. Every step, every note, every moment on stage carries more weight than ever before. It's no longer just entertainment, it's a testament to resilience. And yet, despite everything, there's no bitterness in his story. No anger at the industry, no regret about the path he chose. Just acceptance and gratitude. That's rare. In a world where many artists chase relevance, Alan Jackson chose something far more difficult. He chose consistency. He chose to stay true, even when it meant being left behind by mainstream trends. And in doing so, he created something timeless. Because trends fade, but truth doesn't. His fans understand that now more than ever. That's why his farewell tour isn't just selling tickets, it's creating moments. Moments where people bring their children, their parents, even their memories. Moments where songs like Remember When or Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning don't just play, they hit. They remind people of who they were, what they felt, and what they've lost along the way. And maybe that's Alan Jackson's greatest gift. He didn't just give people music, he gave them pieces of their own lives back. As the lights dim on his final performances, there's an unspoken understanding in the air. This isn't just goodbye to an artist, it's goodbye to an era where country music was built on storytelling, not algorithms, on emotion, not production, on truth, not trends. But even as he steps away, his legacy doesn't. It lives on in every artist who dares to be real, in every songwriter who chooses honesty over hype, in every listener who still believes that music should feel something. And most of all, it lives on in the simple, powerful idea that defined his entire journey. You don't have to change who you are to matter. In the end, Alan Jackson didn't just stay true to country music, he stayed true to himself. And that is why he'll never really be gone.
And even as the road begins to quiet, there are still stories left in the echoes of Alan Jackson's journey. Stories that remind us why his presence mattered far beyond the charts. Because what made him different wasn't just his voice, it was his restraint. In an industry that often rewards noise, Alan Jackson mastered silence, the pauses between words, the space between notes, the kind of delivery that didn't demand attention but earned it. That subtlety became his signature. You didn't just hear his music, you felt it settle into your bones. And maybe that's why his songs aged differently. While many hits from the 90s became tied to a moment in time, Jackson's music seemed to grow with people. A song you heard at 20 meant something entirely different at 40, and even more at 60. His lyrics weren't locked to a trend, they were tied to life itself. That kind of timelessness can't be manufactured. It comes from living honestly. It comes from knowing heartbreak, making mistakes, asking for forgiveness, and meaning it. His relationship with Denise, for example, wasn't just a footnote in his biography. It was a reflection of everything he ever sang about. Love that breaks, bends, and somehow finds a way to heal. In a world where celebrity relationships often feel disposable, theirs stood as something real, imperfect, tested, but enduring. And that authenticity bled into every corner of his work. When he sang about faith, it didn't feel performative. When he sang about loss, it didn't feel exaggerated. When he sang about joy, it didn't feel forced. It felt lived. That's a rare gift. And it's also why his quiet rebellion against the industry mattered so much. When Murder on Music Row was released with George Strait, it wasn't just criticism. It was a line drawn in the sand, a refusal to let something meaningful be replaced by something marketable. At the time, some saw it as resistance. Now, many see it as prophecy, because the shift they warned about didn't just happen, it accelerated. And yet, even as the genre moved further away from its roots, Alan Jackson never chased it. He didn't rebrand himself. He didn't experiment just to stay relevant. He stayed exactly where he was and let the world come to him. That takes conviction, but it also comes with a cost. Fewer radio plays, less mainstream visibility, a gradual fading from the spotlight. For many artists, that would feel like failure. For him, it felt like freedom, because success in his world was never about being the biggest name. It was about being the most honest one. And now, as he steps away from touring, there's something almost poetic about the timing. He's not being pushed out. He's not burning out. He's simply choosing to close the chapter on his own terms. There's dignity in that. There's also a quiet sadness, not just for fans, but for what his departure represents. Because when artists like Alan Jackson step away, they don't just leave a gap, they leave a standard that becomes harder to find. But maybe that's where his legacy becomes even more important, not as something to mourn, but as something to protect. Because somewhere out there's a young artist listening to his records for the first time, hearing that simplicity, that truth, that unmistakable sincerity, and maybe, just maybe, deciding to follow that path instead of the easier one. If that happens even once, his influence continues. And in that sense, he never really retires. He just becomes part of the foundation, the kind that future generations build on, even if they don't always realize it. So yes, the tours will end, the stages will go quiet, the spotlight will fade, but the songs, they'll still be there, playing in the background of long drives, echoing through old memories, showing up when people need 'em most. And years from now, when someone asks what country music used to feel like, what it meant before everything changed, there will be one name that keeps coming up. Not because he was the loudest, not because he was the most controversial, but because he was the most real. Alan Jackson didn't just leave behind music, he left behind truth, and truth doesn't fade.
As the final miles of his journey stretch out ahead, there's a quiet kind of poetry in how Alan Jackson is saying goodbye, not with spectacle, but with sincerity. Because that's how he arrived, too. No grand entrance, no desperate chase for attention, just a man with a guitar, a story, and a voice that felt like home. And maybe that's what makes this ending hit differently. It doesn't feel like something is being taken away. It feels like something is being gently placed down after being carried with care for a lifetime. There's something deeply human in that.
In many ways, Alan Jackson's career mirrors the very themes he sang about. Beginnings rooted in hope, seasons of struggle, moments of joy, painful detours, and ultimately, a sense of peace. Not perfection, but peace. The kind that comes from knowing you stayed true, even when it would have been easier not to. And for fans, that realization is bittersweet, because while his music will always remain, there's something irreplaceable about presence, about knowing that somewhere out there he's still stepping onto a stage, still tipping his hat, still delivering those songs the way only he can. That presence is what people are holding on to now. At his recent performances, you can feel it in the crowd. It's not just excitement, it's gratitude. People aren't just cheering, they're thanking him. Thanking him for the years, the memories, the comfort his songs brought during moments they couldn't put into words themselves. And he seems to understand that without needing to say much. That's always been his way. Where others filled silence with noise, he filled it with meaning. Even now, as time and health place natural limits on what he can do, there's no sense of defeat in him. If anything, there's a quiet strength, a steady acceptance that this is simply another chapter, not an end. Because artists like Alan Jackson don't really disappear. They transition, from performers to storytellers, from voices on stage to voices in memory. And in that transition, something powerful happens. The music becomes bigger than the man. Songs like Drive for Daddy Jean or Remember When don't belong to a single moment anymore. They belong to everyone who has ever loved, lost, grown older, or looked back on life with a mix of gratitude and ache. That's the kind of legacy that can't be measured. Not in awards, not in sales, but in how deeply it lives inside people. And maybe that's the final lesson in his story.